Welcome to the ONSTAGE podcast. I'm your host, Chris Robert. Look at that. I like that little intro and then the explosion. I might change it because I've watched all the other podcasts, and what happens is that they just do the intro. It lasts 3 seconds and they're into it. And I want people to actually get into the interview. Look at my hair. Oh my goodness. Okay. So today we have a special guest, and actually I had communication over the last couple of months. He's really a good musician. I really love his music. Some of it is actually fantastic. His melodies are infectious, they're uplifting and full of energy, and his ability to inspire a sense of community in the diverse crowd, well, you just have to watch this. So I'm going to show you some of his music, and it's a minute montage, and then we will introduce him. His name is mattstern, just so you know, mattstern music, as you know. So let's do this.
What it wants against all reason. It has me breathing in the waves of your love. I don't know if I feel safe in this place anymore. In this place anymore. You know you're making me wait. All you want is more than I have to give. Chance to live. I still taste you on my tongue, and I would be fortunate to lie with you.
There we go. Look at that. That's mattstern music, and we are going to introduce now mattstern. Hello, Matt. How's it going?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. It's going great. How are you doing?
We're doing well here in Toronto. And we were just talking, and that you're in Victoria, BC, and it's a really nice. I've been there like years ago. And it's really nice down there.
It's like an island paradise, to be honest. Here, we're very spoiled.
I can understand that. Yeah, of course, because you're separated from everyone, and
we're in a bubble.
Yeah, and so before we continue grilling you and getting stern with you,
yes, I
and we can ask you some stern questions.
That's what I want.
Can you just give us a little bit of a background of who you are and what makes you the person you are today?
Yeah, I'm originally from Montreal, so that's a big part of my upbringing and the sort of the culture I've absorbed most of my life. I've been here on the island for the past 5 years, and I'm a musician, but I'm also very excited about all forms of artistic expression. I've been doing a lot of dance lately, and improv theater, just kind of anything that makes people kind of feel more fully alive and connected. I've been drawn to, and I'm always exploring new ways to do that. I also love languages, and I sing in different languages because it kind of gives you access, again, to different means of expression.
Yeah, that's right. I was asking somebody. They mentioned about the number of languages that you can speak. What languages are those?
The ones that I could get by in, well, I speak French, being from Montreal, and I also speak Spanish and Japanese. And I've dabbled in other ones, mostly, again, through music, because that's an easy access point. Even if you're not fluent, you can kind of learn phonetically, right?
Japanese?
Yeah.
Like fluently?
Yeah, definitely not fluently, but I could hold a conversation. I think I would need a good, proper period of immersion to get fluent, but it's always through friends. So I had some really close Japanese friends, and that made me really curious to learn that language, and so I got started with that then.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you just turn up your volume a little bit? Just I think it might have. Am I coming through clear though?
Yeah, you're clear. Is that any better?
That's a little bit better. Yeah. I had an East Indian friend, and it was teaching me Hindi and Punjabi, but a lot of the stuff he taught me was how to say certain bad words. And I'm like, no, I want you to show me how to say hello, how are you?
That was my experience with Spanish actually. I had friends at summer camp who were from Venezuela and Mexico, and it was all swear words at first. And I wanted to know what they're saying. So whatever the way in though, that you can then go from there, right?
I know. So, what made you want to become a musician? Uh, we'll start with maybe when you were younger and you said to yourself, "Hey, I sound pretty good. I should be a singer." Like, how did it result? How did it come about?
I'd say it was very much an unconscious drive at first, just a really fierce need to express what was more difficult to express in other situations socially, I guess, just like, and that just was a burgeoning feeling as I got older, and when I started to learn some instruments, I had more channels for that, so I could start writing songs on guitar and piano. I just found it was a really kind of a direct, pure way to synthesize experience. So it wasn't really like, I know some people have that moment where they're like, I want to be a musician, but I feel like it was more of a constant impulse than than a moment, like a realization. It was just like I was always compelled to express myself through music.
So you didn't have any inkling that you wanted to be something like with me. It's funny, but I wanted to be things like a doctor in a spaceship. I wanted to be Captain Kirk. I wanted to be. I was a big Star Trek fan. Then I wanted to be a private detective. Wanted to be an FBI agent and an archaeologist. But I never in my mind said I want to be a singer until maybe 15, 20 years ago when I thought, maybe singing is something I should do. But I'm always late with things. I
Yeah,
say,
sometimes it takes a while to rise to the
yeah,
surface.
yeah.
I
Did
have
you?
this page in a journal that I had when I was a teenager, full of examples like that. Like, oh, maybe I want to be uh, like an astronaut. Maybe I want to be a politician. Just kind of anything that came to mind. Not vetted, obviously, until later. But yeah, I think it's sometimes it is over time things become clearer.
Yeah, I did a lot of singing when I was a kid. I used to sing and dance on the living room floor. I used to play like my Sesame Street album, all the music, all the musicals like Jesus Christ Superstar, um, all these other musicals that you never heard of, and then I would sing. But I never said to myself, I want to be a singer and dancer. It was always like, hey, I can sing great, but I want to be a police officer. Made no sense. But
Yeah, but it's like if oh, go
hmm?
ahead.
Just
Oh,
recently,
go.
like 20 years ago, um, I said, I might start getting into singing, and I did for a while, and then I kind of like it now. But like I said, it's getting kind of late for my age, and I know there's no ageism in music because there's 90-year-old singers out there, and but I never did play any music in high school. Like, how about in high school? Did you play an instrument in high school?
Yeah, I picked up the trombone in high school and I played in band, played in marching band and that sort of thing. And I still have my trombone and use it whenever I have the opportunity. But
You weren't the
I
guy
agree
with
with
boom, 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 the end, boom, boom.
yeah, but yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It's really never too late. I was just jamming with a friend who's my neighbor here, and his dad picked up guitar at 55 and never looked back. Like it's such a huge part of his life now. But I feel like when you look closely, the signs are there early on, whether or not, again, we're conscious of them. My parents just came across some home videos where I'm singing and dancing in front of the camera at like 2 or 3, and like you, it might have taken me like more than a decade to realize that this is something I want to focus my attention on. But the signs were there right away that I was drawn to it.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, it's not like you were born with a microphone in your hand, but you know, the voice. Once you start singing sick, like Britney Spears, I guess when she was 13, there's a video of her singing, and that's when she was a nobody. And now look where she is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let me ask you: do you have any hobbies or interests outside of music?
No, just music. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, I'm interested in so much about life. Lately, I've been very physical because I think after the major pandemic period, it was
Yeah.
kind of the most sedentary period of my life, like for so many people. So I really had a strong impulse to start moving my body again. So I've been doing lots of kinds of dance. I've been doing some physical trainings, anything to kind of get me out in the world and moving. Um, I'm also just really interested in learning and reading about different parts of the world and different cultures, and again, anything to do with arts outside of music, science, especially these days again because we're faced with so many new scientific questions.
Yeah,
Really,
it
just
was.
very curiosity based.
Yeah, it was kind of difficult for everyone in the pandemic. I talked to a lot of musicians saying that that's their livelihood. So a lot of them would put on concerts online. People would give them donations, and it was pretty good. And but one musician I talked to just a couple of weeks ago said that she's ready to go out there and perform again. And but yeah, the pandemic really kind of ended a lot of people because it's like you can't go and perform.
On the
Um,
other hand, though, I have quite a few artist friends who shared that they, in those initial lockdown periods, felt a kind of relief because they could focus on creative pursuits unobstructed. Like we're so used to dividing our attention and having to go against the grain to focus on an artistic project because there's so many responsibilities. But when the world shut down, it was kind of a, if there was a silver lining for artists, I think sometimes you're right for sure. So many performances had to be canceled, but on the other hand, there was a lot more time that people weren't used to having. So in some cases, people shared with me that it benefited them in that way.
How about a lot of the music that you wrote, like Obsolete and My Jeans Full Moon? Was that written during the pandemic or before? Like, do you have a specific song that you have written prior, like during the pandemic?
So those songs that you mentioned were all released on an album that I released just like 2 months before the peak of the
Oh,
initial
okay.
peak of the pandemic. So they were written before, but in that first lockdown, I did get really serious about writing new songs and exploring new instruments. I got myself like a little MIDI keyboard and played with loops and percussion and stuff. So I have actually a whole album's worth of new songs that are in a very different direction from my most recent albums, and I'm still sort of tinkering about how I'll flesh those out.
Yeah, they're pretty good. When you're talking about earlier about Japan, I noticed that you were part of the Enoshima Music Festival in Japan. Did,
Yeah.
but you had to converse with them in English, of course. But I guess you want to learn Japan. What do? You go to Japan to learn it. Um,
Yeah, I learned a little bit before going with friends here, and then it was all very serendipitous. I actually reached out to a band whose show I was going to called Be the Voice, and I met them after their show in Tokyo, and they invited me on the spot to come do a kind of homestay with them so they could practice their English. And then I just kind of became their shadow for a couple of weeks, and I went with them to the Enoshima Festival.
well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, what strengths do you have that you believe make you a great musician?
I think the way that I connect with people authentically, like I'm very, just like I said earlier, is really curiosity driven. So when I'm in, like when I meet you, I'm not just like you're not just like a symbolic figure. I'm curious about you and what your story is. And I think that's why that leads to everything that I do. So those connections, genuine connections with people, become collaborations and become create a kind of artistic path that's not about ego. That's not about trying to be like what we're very familiar with, like just trying to be popular or well liked. It's about always about genuine connection and the creative possibilities that stem from that.
Yeah, that's very true. Um, but what about your weaknesses? Is there anything that you're actively working to improve on?
I'd say, well, before we started the interview officially, you mentioned I have a lot of music out there. So I've traditionally been prolific with the behind the scenes creativity, but I've been a shy performer for a lot of the time that I've been a musician. So if I was to say a weakness, it's just sort of like owning performance. And I've done it more in the past couple of years, but just there's so much further to go in terms of like mounting a real like solid show. So that's what I'd say I'm working on right now.
Well, I
Shows that
see that.
match my recordings.
Yeah, I see that you're published for Precious and Sacred, a book dedicated to Indigenous children. Um, is playing and performing Indigenous music something that you're shooting for?
Not specifically. The way that came about, again, it was very kind of naturally serendipitous. I came across a book called Precious and Sacred at
Hmm.
the Association of Native Friendship Centers here, because his brother works there actually. And I was really drawn to this book. It's a book ostensibly for children, but kind of the message is so universal. It's just about wanting everyone to feel that they're precious and sacred. And it was written by the author's name is Deborah Aboud, and she works a lot with survivors of various kinds of trauma.
Mm.
So I just that resonated so much with me that that's my wish for myself and everyone, that we know our worth. So again, we're not so focused on pursuing validation and popularity because we already have that notion of our worth. So I just was inspired to write a melody along with the words, and I sent that to the author and the publisher, and they really loved it. So they encouraged me to record a version of it, and I included it on one of my albums.
Yeah, I was. I remember when the pandemic first started. You ever heard of Chris Mann? He did a lot of videos online, and during the pandemic, he did a one called COVID Rhapsody, and it was a nice little parody. And then Pete Davidson and Adam Sandler came up with a nice rapping tune about staying at home. It
Yeah.
was actually pretty good. I don't know if you ever have seen that video. It's pretty good.
I think I did come across it actually when it was kind of viral.
Yeah, and a lot of people actually, hey, if we're gonna have this pandemic, I might as well try to do something at home. And a lot of them came up with their own businesses, their own albums. I noticed that the one that Take It or Leave It is one you were talking about that was released in 2020. You said 2 months before the pandemic?
Yeah, and you just reminded me of it because the video I made for that song was everybody dancing during quarantine, either outdoors or in their own lockdown spaces. And yeah, it really forced us to be resourceful in so many ways. A lot of people who just started businesses that were starting to do well had to close them down. But yeah, it's sort of the human ingenuity aspect is another potential silver lining. It's just when we're forced into a corner, like what do we do then if we can't do any of our normal things?
Yeah. Um, I like that song where I think you got some people to send in fans to send them videos and you put it together in a song video. That's a nice one. How long did
Yeah,
that
that's
take you to put
that's
together?
what I was referring to. That took well, there's a period of just taking in submissions that was probably a week or two, and then I spent a couple days very much on a learning curve because I'm not at all a professional at video editing, but again, I just sort of launched into it out of necessity. That was so early on. Wasn't even a question of finding a director. I was just like, I guess it's up to me. So
Yeah,
yeah, a
that's a
couple
good one.
intensive days of editing.
Yeah. And In My Dreams was done in a certain type of video. It was just purple and there was no color to it. It was just it's like a dreamy sequence, sort of. I guess that's what your intention was.
Well, actually, I can can tell you the behind the scenes scoop about that. That was another experiment with my friend and collaborator here, who's called the Velvet Unicorn, and we went for a walk in downtown Victoria with that in mind to make a video, and we only noticed after filming it that actually um, I had a bird poo on me on my back. So you're giving away the scoop. So we played with filters so that we could still use the footage. So it's always sort of like tinkering and playing with
Oh,
what what reality gives you.
yeah. So you want to mask that? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Um, so what is it about? That's very interesting response to that. What is it about music that makes you feel so passionate? Like, why do you want to be in the music? Like, where do you find yourself 5 years from now?
Uh, okay, well, to answer the first part of the question, I think it's that feeling when you're kind of in the right place where you feel most like yourself. Because I think we've all been in situations where, you're not quite like you don't feel good in your own skin, kind of like the environment isn't really adhering to who you feel you are or what your values are. Um, so I find every time I dive into music and especially like a singer-lyric collaboration, and kind of pure creativity, I feel like I'm most myself. So it's just a feeling of fullness, like I'm on the, even if I don't think in a dichotomy of right and wrong path, that's essentially what I mean. Like I'm on the right path. And to your second part of your question, where I see myself in 5 years, um, I think it's having kind of like us mentioning earlier, leveling up the quality of my performances, which will mean making some new connections with new musicians that I'm excited to play with, and just having a lot of time and space to devote to musical projects. Because again, coming out of the pandemic period, there's a lot of divided attention and a lot of um, harnessing focus and juggling, and I would love to just be able to take the time that it takes to get it to the quality that I'm always striving for.
Well, this person says that getting pooped on by a bird is initiation here in BC. Is that true?
I think it is because I think it was that day that happened like two or three times in one day in downtown Victoria. I actually literally bought a new shirt and then it happened again. So yeah, welcome to BC.
Yeah. Well, I think I've been pooped on by a bird 2 or 3 times, but it's like, oh, edit that out.
People say it's good luck, but I think that's just to make you feel better. No, let's go with it being good luck.
Well, people are putting in some great questions, but we'll leave those to the question and answer period at the end. But let me ask you, what describe your creative process when you write new music? Like, how do you come up? Number one, with the title. Number two, is the title from somewhere in the lyrics? Like in my dreams, would that be actually in the lyrics?
I would say often the title comes later for me. I don't usually start with a title and then write flesh out
Mhm.
a song. Usually it starts with a kind of musical phrase somewhere in the middle of the song. So it could be a line in the chorus or a first line in a verse. And then it expands from there, kind of in all directions. And yeah, often the title comes last. And in that example, that title changed because I used to sing the chorus just with the word dreams. And then I changed it in the studio to in my dreams. So it's very malleable, I'd say.
Do you kind of like stamp the title in stone, or do you have like, oh, well, you know what, I want to change that title? Are you like that type of person? Do you just say, oh, it's going to be in my dreams, or it's going to be this, it's going to be the song Absolute. The title is Absolute. Have they ever said, are you sure? You sure you don't want to change it?
I have the other challenge. I'm very flexible, very open, and sometimes that's my Achilles heel is that I could stand to be a little bit more firm because everything's very open-ended. I always feel like songs are unfinished and I love to play them with people because they take them in new directions. And so yeah, I'm very seldom like this is fixed, this is the final answer, it has to be this. But sometimes it's worth being that way when you have a really strong instinct.
Yeah. What type of musician would you prefer to collaborate with? Like, do you have a famous musician you collaborated with at some point or like to?
I'd love to collaborate with uh, really soulful singers because I, I've gotten more into like exploring various ways to sing and perform, but I think in the past I used to see myself as more of a songwriter, and I really love the idea of other people singing my songs. So I think of singers like I was lately. I think of Sade a lot. I think I would love.
Dang.
I mean, I just love her anything she sings. I was listening to Bonnie Raitt in the car the other day, another singer I really love. I mean, there's so many. But yeah, I think in terms of collaboration, I think having really powerful singers play my songs and see what they do with them would excite me to no end.
So there's not going to be no Matt Stern featuring Sting songs anytime soon, I guess.
I mean, I wouldn't say no to a collaboration with Sting.
But he's not soulful, so
He can be quite soulful, I think.
yeah,
Here's another
I think
example. I love musicians like him too, who like they dabble in so many different genres. I
yeah.
really relate to that too, not wanting to be really boxed in any particular thing. They're just kind of musical explorers. So I get that from his music a lot.
Okay, what describe your favorite venue for performing?
Well, what comes to mind immediately is outdoors, just kind of where people can move and dance freely,
Hmm.
so without the formality of being in seats, because there's such a connection between live music and movement. So any venue that facilitates that would intrigue me. And well, I told you earlier, I'm looking out at the ocean right now, so maybe an outdoor venue right next to the ocean would be ideal.
Yeah, why not? Does the
Yeah.
amount of people that the venue can contain make you more nervous? Would you be less nervous in front of singing for 40 people than you would in front of 4,000 people?
I've wondered about that, and I think that has to do with my configuration on stage. I think when I feel bolstered by like a powerful group of musicians, I think that I could definitely for a huge crowd because it's sort of you have that energy with you. Um, but it's true that for small venues, like there's this legendary little venue in Montreal called the Yellow Door, which is like a basement in the McGill ghetto, and those are some of the most beautiful shows too, with just, like just a handful of people in the audience, but everyone's so in it with you, so intently in it. That intimacy, I mean, I'm drawn to both.
Can you tell us about your favorite performance in your career?
Um, One of my favorite performances was I played at a festival in France in a town called Châteauroux, like in the center of France near Tours. And that was kind of a lark. They invited me spontaneously to play because I had one song at the time that they liked. And they provided a band. So I flew to Paris, met the band, rehearsed for maybe a day, and then went to the festival. And that was pretty novel. The whole experience was so novel and special to be part of that experience. So that was definitely one of my favorites.
What was your worst performance, and what did you learn from the experience?
I was just thinking about this the other day because I made a new friend of a friend here who's also from Montreal, and we were talking about venues in Montreal, and there's a bar called Barfly that I'm sure is still there. And I played there once with a friend, and we were competing with the hockey game, which
Hmm.
you just don't do, right? And I think I say that was one of my quote unquote worst performances, just because it challenged me so much to know how to be part of that space where that wasn't what people were doing. Like they weren't there to see someone stand there with a guitar and sing. So I don't want to compete with where people want to be. So that was, that tested me.
Do you feel that you're going to have any more bad performances? Do you think they're still going to go uphill from here?
I definitely think there will be all sorts of performances in all sorts of venues because you never know what to expect.
Hmm.
And I do sort of reframe it in a paradigm of learning experience. So it doesn't worry me, but I have learned to watch out for certain things, and namely sound, because you can be as prepared as ever and with great musicians, but if you get to a venue and the sound is crap, then it'll be a bad show, and
Well,
that's
yeah,
tragic sometimes. So I've
it's all
learned
about
to,
audio, huh? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, being a musician, what do you think are the qualities that make a good musician? Can well, good voice, obviously, but if you can't sing, then can you play an instrument? Can you play it well? What do you think makes a good musician?
I think it's awareness that it's about connection. I go back to that idea a lot because if you're in, and it gets reinforced in our culture a lot, but if you're in a paradigm of seeking validation and just trying to be impressive, then you don't really make that connection the same way. So in my view, what makes a good musician is you're really trying to make connections with people and share something and have them have an experience that's meaningful. So if you're conscious of that and you sort of keep that as your guiding perspective, those are the kinds of musicians that I relate to.
So, being a great musician as yourself and having the qualities that make a good musician, is there another musician you've monitored or trained, and describe what you've done to help them?
Um, I have some friends here that we just have we have brainstorms together. So they're a bit younger than me, and so I wouldn't say I necessarily overtly train or mentor them, but I just share what sorts of things I've experienced. Um, certain like one theme I always come back to is that notion of feeling a lot of doubt and hesitation, then trying things anyway. So because I feel like that's just part of the process, and the biggest growth opportunities are the ones where you feel the most doubt. So I find that's a message that's helpful for people with less experience, is just to know that a doubt is par for the course, and just try things, and like let it be messy along the way.
Okay, and then you can refine whatever, like for instance, a song. Uh, how would you go about writing a song? Like, what's the first steps? You mentioned that earlier, but is there a point where you're just sleeping and you wake up and say, "Oh, I had a great melody," write out the lyrics? Have you ever had that happen?
That happened just last week. I woke up from a dream with like a fully formed melody for a chorus, and
Oh,
if I don't record it or write it down right away, it'll get lost, like many dreams, right? So yeah, it does happen, and then it's just a matter of carving out the time to develop it further.
yeah, and
It's
is
like
that?
when
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, brings me back to your previous question about where I see myself in 5 years. Having the time to do that and not having to compete with too many other things, that's always the dream. So that you don't have to put things on the back burner indefinitely. You can kind of you have that impulse, and it's like, okay, there's a song here, let's go with it.
Yeah, I know that back in the golden ages, and I guess 60s, 70s, do you sort of keep to like one album a year type of thing that many musicians have done? Because I've heard of musicians pumping out two or three albums a year, like Taylor Swift, for instance. And I'm thinking, why don't you just do one a year? Because it's not how many albums you bring out, but it's not quantity, it's quality. So
Mm.
there are some musicians that would say, "Oh, we're coming out with a new album," but their last album was 20 years ago. So what do you think about that? Are you the type of person to do one album a year, or one album when you feel like it, or?
I think I've been a bit of both. Like an example of what you just mentioned, I heard Willie Nelson once. It took like 10 years to release an album. And yeah, Taylor Swift could be several years. I think she has a big backlog of stuff ready to go. Um, yeah, I've been a bit of both because I have been a prolific songwriter, so I have lots in the vault. But I do like to take my time to flesh things out in a satisfying, intentional way. So I don't, quality is really important to me, right? So I sort of like to go with a natural timing. I don't like it to be pressured, um,
Mhm.
to like churn it out, but I have a bit of a backlog, so that motivates me too to be productive.
Well, I was listening to. First of all, I came up with my own Matt Stern on stage greatest hits, and I
Oh,
shared it in the description. They just have to look at it, and I noticed that there's a song called "A Letter Home," which I really like. Can you explain how that one came about?
yeah, that's a fun prompt. That was on my first album, and I co-wrote that with my friend Mike Spilka, who was a really adept guitarist. So that one started with a riff that he had written and shared with me, and then we passed it back and forth. I added some lyrics to it, and then I added a chorus, and then I passed that back to him, and he added some new chords. So that was an early collaboration that was really fruitful and and satisfying.
Yeah, and another one I like is "Don't Tell Me." That's another one which probably has a history to that one.
Yeah, that's an example of one that was from the vault that I rediscovered while I was preparing to record my last album, and I was like, oh, there's something here. The recording was a really rough demo on a mandolin, and I hardly play mandolin. I was just tinkering with it, and I was like, oh, there's something here. So I fleshed that one out, and that one actually has become. I translated it to French for my upcoming French album, and we made a music video for it. So that one's kind of at the top of the pile right now. I'm really excited to share the French version and the video.
Yeah, isn't that mandolin the one you played on One More Night video?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think I almost couldn't remember if I played mandolin or ukulele on that one, but I
It
think you're
wasn't a
right. That was,
guitar because I noticed it wasn't a guitar, it was something else.
yeah, I think you're right. That was also written on mandolin initially. You just
Yeah.
reminded me that I hadn't thought about that in a while.
Well, I'm thinking if anybody who can play guitar would be able to play anything like ukulele and mandolin, and I'm not sure if you can play a violin, if you can play a guitar, it's a totally different instrument. Oh, another one I like is called Dis-moi que tu m'aimes. That's a good French song, really good.
That's the one that got me invited to that festival in France. And and every
It's amazing.
song, it was another early collaboration on my first album that I co-wrote with my friend Yolande Monfiston, and it was just in my basement, kind of jamming and singing along, very raw, and then that developed into that song that, yeah, a lot of people have loved since then.
Yeah, tell me, I was watching one of your videos. One was called "Not the Chance to Live." One it was called "Take It or Leave It." I think we discussed that before, but one of these was actually pretty difficult. I feel maybe the "Keeps Me Awake" video. How long did I'm looking at? I'm thinking of all the way the camera was just following you as you walked. That didn't really. That must have taken a while because I know that people say like some musicians they were doing a video where they just have the camera following them. Like for instance, one of the Taylor Swift songs as well does the same thing. Did that one take you very long to record?
It took an afternoon in an area in Victoria called Market Square, so we got permission to kind of to film there, and that was a local filmmaker friend, Alan Nichols, who filmed that, and he had the concept of doing that color grading where some of the people appear in black and white. That probably took him longer on the post-production side in editing, but the filming, yeah, because that was one take, we had to take a few takes, but because I knew my song pretty well, didn't take as long as you might think. I think we maybe took 4 or 5 shots and then chose the best one. It's
Yeah,
amazing how much you film yourself just walking in music videos for dramatic effect.
yeah. It's very interesting. I noticed that you'd like to do a lot of covers. Now, one cover that I really appreciated watching was the Imagine one, the John Lennon Imagine song you did. Um, Everyone likes to do Imagine. That's a cover you can't go wrong with. Why did you choose that one to do a cover of?
That one actually, usually when I do covers, it's intrinsically motivated. Like there's a song that I love or that's been in my head and I just need to get it out. But I think I did that one. I usually stay away from those sort of like go to um, legendary covers. They just things like Imagine or One Love by Bob Marley or Hallelujah or Leonard Cohen. I tend to not do those ones, but in that case, I did an experiment, like a project for a month, like where I took requests, and it was a friend that requested that one. So that can be kind of interesting too if it's not one that I would have chosen. That's a different way and a different sort of challenge to really feel it and not feel like it's cliche or cheesy because it's a beautiful song, but I had to sort of find a new inspiration in it.
Yeah, I like cover songs. I don't know if there's a I think he's about 17 or 18, but his name is Duck Sama, and he does a lot of covers. So he did a cover of Imagine Dragons song "Wrecked,"
Mm.
and the first, if I could do a reaction video, I would just be going off the wall because this guy, like, what is that voice coming out of that guy? I mean, definitely, it's amazing. Some of the cover songs that people do. You ever heard of Nuno Casais? He's another
That
one that
name
does
rings a bell,
covers.
actually.
Nuno Casais, yeah, he does a lot of covers and excellent, and just plays it's not electric guitar, it's an electric acoustic. It looks like an acoustic
Mm.
guitar, but it's an electric one. And I'm just
That's what I
amazed at
use.
some of the cover songs people do, and a lot of cover songs that you did, and you can't go wrong with that. Um, so let's say I'm just a new musician and I want to be a singer or whatever. What is one piece of advice you can give them that they gave you?
I'd say a first step is to carve out the time and space to devote to Um, Learning about what your desires and impulses and curiosities are. So like spending time with yourself in that state of curiosity is one major aspect. And then also, like we touched on earlier, not being afraid for it to be messy at first. I have a lot of friends that were trained often classically, and so they're used to having sheet music. And if you want to get into the more like open-ended creativity, you have to somehow be okay with being not being good at it, right? Sort of so giving yourself permission. Permission is the word that comes to mind. Permission to not sound good, to sing off key. To we all start there.
Well, I have another question I want to ask you here, but apparently my friend had asked a question before me, but he missed the first 15 minutes of the interview, but he would also like be interested in knowing your main musical influences. Um, and another person had answered that, asked that same question. Um, Soulful Poetry said, "Who are some of your musical influences?" So basically, maybe you can give one answer for both of them. You want to start with his?
Yeah, sure. I'd say, I mean, my first instinct is to say it's all over the map, but I know, but just to be more satisfying in my response, I'd say like I grew up as the baby of the family, so my parents and my three older brothers, I have them all to thank for exposing me to so many different kinds of music. So like my mom was really passionate about music from West Africa. She played Morikante, popular like in the 90s. So I got that kind of that exposure to music from a whole different cultural background early on, and that was exciting. There's also a lot of Graceland, Paul Simon playing in the house, and Rolling Stones, Bob Marley, and then my brothers were into like grunge, so I got the like Pearl Jam and Red Hot Chili Peppers, and when I was in high school, I got excited about ska music. So usually initially through No Doubt, but then looking further back, um, and again more sort of 90s alternative like Weezer. My first songs I played on guitar were probably that sort of thing. Through learning other languages, I'm getting into music from Latin America, and that being a whole other source of inspiration. It is really all over the map. I went through a period where I got really interested in roots of folk music. I was listening to Peter, Paul, and Mary, and just you follow other people's influences further back and see what sourced them, and takes you in all sorts of directions, and then ends up influencing my songwriting and what sorts of things I try. Again, in a messy way, not knowing what I'm doing, but just dive in.
And then earlier on in the conversation, we mentioned about performing, and then some of the mistakes that might happen. Even though you might have the audio, you might have the drummers, you might have those who play the oboe, you might have the conductor, whatever. You're all set, but something still goes wrong. Even though you spend a week and a half, 2 weeks making it perfect, something's always going to go wrong. Like the power would go out, or the person calls in sick, and you don't really know where you can find a keyboardist at that time. Um, let's talk about what kind of process or ritual before performance that you would get rid of nerves or performance anxiety.
Well, I'd say taking care of physiological needs helps a lot. So if you can't or you're able to, being well slept and well fed and grounded helps a lot to be alert and ready for all sorts of impromptu accidents. A lot of amazing moments happen from accidents, of course, if you're able to just pivot and try something new. One example that's coming to mind, another of my favorite musicians is Patty Griffin, and I got to see her in Montreal. Um, do you not know her? Is that why you're?
No.
Yeah, she's
Like
also
me. Like
prolific.
us. Who is she?
She's another prolific songwriter. You've probably heard covers of her songs. She's been covered by a lot of people. But when I saw her in Montreal, she the fire alarm went off right near the end of the show, and then the this electricity was cut off. And the way she and her band adapted to that is they just physically stepped off stage and played their last song acoustically, and it was, of course, gorgeous and really meaningful. And so there's always those options available. And another thing that got me into a mentality of adapting to things going wrong was I took a year-long vocal improv workshop with a singer named Rhiannon, who works a lot with Bobby McFerrin, and
Oh, wow.
they call circle singing, like really fully improvised performances. And she was a great mentor, has been a great mentor in having a perspective of like you work with what's in the air, basically. Like you're not, you might have a direction in mind, but you're in real time, so anything can happen, and that's what's exciting. So that really kind of got me out of a headspace of things having to be just so.
Well, my friend said that you have a cool mix of influences, so that's good.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I always have difficulty answering, like pinpointing just a couple, because it's the variety that inspires me. It's here learning new things from different people, so many different ways of singing and being creative.
So you said that someone mentioned to you about a cover song you should do. You actually do it for them because I have one suggestion. If you can do a cover song of Imagine Dragons "Wrecked,"
I
see
have
how
to
well
listen
you.
to that. How does it go again?
I'm a wreck since you've been gone. I am a wreck. It was based on his sister-in-law who passed from cancer, so he wrote a song about it.
Okay. I don't think
So
I've
yeah,
heard it actually. I have
it's a
to
really good
dive in.
song. Even I sang a cover of it, but
Hmm.
nothing can do vocals any better than Brad Reynolds himself, who's the lead singer of Imagine Dragons, one of my favorite groups, of course. Hey, Brad, if you're
That's
out there watching, which I doubt, call me.
call me. It's that's one of the challenges of covers, right? Doing it justice when the original is already
Yeah,
so high
yeah.
quality.
As I mentioned, Duck Sama, he doesn't give us, that's his YouTube channel, Duck Sama. And I think he's like 16. And then Nuno Casais, he does a really good wrecked version. And there's a few girls who have their own YouTube channels, and all you do is sing its covers. And I
Yeah.
listen to 20 or 30 different wrecked covers, and you can't go wrong with it, you know? Um,
So you're not a purist. You like hearing the different interpretations.
yeah. So now you're performing, and your audience looks tired or bored. What do you do during your performance to get them back interested?
Well, the first thing I have to say about that is we are terrible, like performers are terrible at actually interpreting what the audience member is experiencing because people demonstrate their experience in such different ways. I was once watching a friend perform in Montreal and I was loving it and I I told her that after and she said, "Really? Because you looked like you were bored and falling asleep." And I was like, "No, my eyes were closed because I was just feeling every word you were singing." So that's the first thing that comes to mind. That's a very common experience to get really caught up in people's expressions and misinterpret them. Um, and I another thing that comes to mind is I had a singing teacher a long time ago who mentioned that if you're in a noisy bar and you're competing with noise, you won't, this is like a teacher in a classroom almost, you won't overpower them by singing louder. You'll actually more likely get their attention by honing in and singing really intimately, and then they'll perk their ears up. So I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that too. Just get really focused on what you're doing. You don't need everybody's attention, first of all, it's their choice, but they'll be curious if the more your attention is on what you're doing, the more attention, the more likely you'll be to get theirs.
Yeah, because if someone's at the performance listening, chances are they may look like they're not interested, but they could chances are be interested. But those who are like smiling and listening might be in their mind saying, "What am I doing here? Why am I here? I don't really like this guy. Oh my God, what song?
Totally.
Awful song. I want to get up right now and leave." You don't know.
Like I said earlier, I love to be in venues where everybody can move, but that's
Mhm.
me. Like I can't help but move when I'm hearing live music, but I know that often I'm the only one in the venue moving. Everyone's really, you know, either they're self-conscious or they just appreciate it differently.
Wow. So let's go back to the beginning again, and I'm just going to mention to you about my music teacher back in public school, Mr. Baker. I remember,
Hmm.
and I shared this with a very few people, but he was a World War II. veteran, because he explained how, because he had part of his finger torn off. But anyway, and he was a music teacher, and I was sitting there, and I started singing this French song. I think, Viva la Canadienne, vole mon cheval, Viva ma Canadienne, la si jolie do. That's a Canadian song, and of course, you understand that one. That's been going through my head for like the 70s, and I would be given a French song. I'd start singing it, and he says, "Oh, you want to sing? I want to see you here at 4:30 in the afternoon in a music hall." Because he wanted to teach me getting into music and stuff, but I really wasn't interested back in public school. It was really back in, I guess, 20 some odd years ago when I thought I'd take singing seriously. So, you know, and I'm almost 100, so I don't know if I'm just kidding.
But having those figures in our lives, like who take it so seriously, that can have a major influence. I also had a high school music teacher who was trained and experienced in the military, and she brought a level of intensity to high school band that none of us had seen before. It was just like life or death, and that had a major impact on us. We were intimidated by it and her, but it also leveled up our, again, like how much effort and respect we gave to music making, because we're all aware that music in some paradigms is sort of like anything artistic can be on a lower rung than, important things. So having someone who takes it really seriously and says you need to discipline yourself, that can be an important influence, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about, your first music teacher, what they were like, but what lessons did you learn from them?
Well, my first music teacher wasn't actually that high school music teacher. I had a piano teacher
Oh,
who I was very lucky because he really matched my vibe, I'd say. A lot of people have stories of piano teachers who were exceedingly strict. He was a lot of fun, but also extremely knowledgeable. So I got some basic foundations in jazz and classical music, but it was never so formal that it turned me off, and it was never pressure based. I was able to maintain a really intrinsically motivated exploration. So that I was very lucky to have that influence too.
yeah, Mr. Baker really wasn't a nice teacher to have, but we did have one in high school. I don't want to, people are going to wonder, don't mention his name, but they call him Mr. H. And he was a music instructor. He was a conductor. He reminded me of Glenn Holland from Mr. Holland's Opus movie.
Mm.
So he was like Mr. H. There you go, Mr. H. And then our Mr. H is a sort of similar. I should have been more involved in music in high school. Um, Family members played like the clarinet, and then others played the another thing is that play guitar. I was the only one basically who had the voice, and my father was he had a good operatic voice. He was a tenor. He used to sing opera in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So I think it's just him and I. I sort of got my voice from him. Um, so I was going to ask you something else. So how would your previous bandmates describe you and your work ethic?
Mm. I think people that play with me are always surprised. This refers to your question before about whether I have more of a fixed mentality or whether things are open-ended. Because people, if I'm asking them to accompany me, I think they're used to expecting me to tell them pretty precisely what I want them to do. Whereas my approach is usually like, let's see what comes out of you. So this is the song. This is like a basic blueprint, but feel free to explore, like lots of room for exploration because that's my favorite thing. So I think people would describe me along those lines, like that I let them be very free to express themselves fully, and I
Yeah.
want that.
So so if you didn't become a musician, which I guess previously you said no, but if you didn't become a musician, what would you be doing right now?
I think that I'd probably be involved with sort of the alternative education world. And when I say alternative, I mean um, places where kids and adults can be really free to learn in a self-directed manner, explore again their own expression and their own curiosities in a full-fledged manner with support from a community around them. That's been something I've been interested in a really long time, and have some experience in the education world too. But I'm always turned off by any notion of it being stifling. So I could see myself really involved in
Well, you could do that
in
now.
that's true. I just need to find the time. Time.
Yeah. What is the weirdest or funniest thing that's ever happened to you, either on stage or while filming or writing?
Aside from being pooped on several times
Okay, you
by
mentioned
birds, by birds, by birds.
in BC.
Um,
It's a ritual.
I have to think about that one. So many weird things happen daily if you're paying attention. Um, I need to reflect about that one. I'll let you know. Maybe something will come to me spontaneously.
Okay. We have a question and answer here. Someone wants to ask you, do you find that poetry can inspire songwriting?
Definitely. Yeah, I think we're all aware that we're in a culture of like overstimulation and clutter. So we're all, constantly on our screens reading so much. But when I hear the word poetry, it makes me think of more intentional, not always, but sometimes more concise ways of expressing um, thoughts and feelings. So that can kind of hone your focus too. So if I come across a piece of poetry, it kind of like centers me in on something imaginative or something in reality, and that can definitely be a way into songwriting. And initially, a lot of my songs start as poems, so
Well, yeah, I'm actually, I find that I can inspire to sing, maybe taking a piece of Shakespeare acts and do a song about it, maybe. Um, for instance, I don't know if you know what Smooth Sing. It's sort of like a singing app. You can sing with people around the world. I've been on
yeah,
it for 6 years. Before that, Smooth has another product called Songify. So you can literally just speak a piece of poetry. Or what I did is I spoke the entire part of Forrest Gump where he says life is but a box of chocolate, and it turned it into a rap type song, and it was pretty interesting. Um,
yeah.
yeah. Anybody else have any questions you want to ask Matt? Because I have some more questions I want to ask. If I can just, oh my goodness. Sorry, my question thing is just, okay. So,
I'm just plugging in my computer. I just got a low battery warning here.
uh-oh, you don't want to do that. Okay, I have to get rid of this ad here. Not allowing me to see my questions. Okay, if you can have your fans remember one thing about you, what would it be?
Um, I'd want them to remember my sincerity, how I've always endeavored to be as truthful and authentic in everything I do. And hopefully that kind of spirit is contagious. When people see other people doing that,
Yep.
you realize you can also shed facades and all our sort of mechanisms that we apply to be accepted and really be as be as directly ourselves as we can be, as that changes from moment to moment.
Okay, that sounds good. So that's what you want to have on your epitaph?
Yeah, I think so.
If you could open a show for any artist, who would it be?
Is this a dead or alive question?
Yeah, dead. How
The
about
first
dead?
person that came to mind is Jimi Hendrix. That's the
Jimi
flash that I
Hendrix.
got. I love Jimi Hendrix. I just thought, I mean, along the lines of what I was just saying, I think when you watch interviews with him, he was so authentic, And like with many people who become famous, people try to, there's an overlay of an image and a persona that's applied, but he he just wasn't having it, I find, in his answers to interview questions. So yeah, I'd love to open for him, meet him, play with him.
Yeah, I think I'd like to sing with. Actually, mine would be alive. Josh
Who would it
Groban
be?
or Sting. Maybe play.
Yeah.
I don't know. It depends if I sound good with them. Like if I were to, if Taylor Swift said, "Okay, I want you to sing with me," I'd say, "What song?" I said, "What song do you want?" And then I would just choose one because I don't really sound good with a lot of people. It's
Mm,
interesting because I want to sound good with people that I want to sound good with, and sometimes it doesn't happen. And like you're saying, you're singing, you see people in the audience, you don't know if like they might be bored or something. With
mm.
me, I'm singing with someone, and in my mind, I'm thinking I sound terrible, you know. But you
But
can't
yeah,
renege.
you can't what?
I can't renege on it. It's sort
And
of
you
like
can't really know while you're in it. Sometimes it's with a bit of distance that you, if you listen to a recording, maybe you thought you didn't gel with them, but then you're like, actually, it really did resonate, or vice versa.
well, I do sound good with some singers, but not all. And but okay, that sounds. What is what question is this? Do you sing in the shower? Okay, everyone does, I think. I think that's a yes and
Yeah,
no question.
yeah, I don't sing as often as many people do in the shower because I'm singing everywhere else. I'd say that. It's not like, because a lot of people will say, I only sing in the shower so that nobody can hear me. But yeah, I'm singing. All my experiences are interspersed with singing.
That's good. Um, Here's a question for you. Do you think it's still possible to create something original and fresh sounding, or has everything been done already?
Mm, I love that question. My mom sometimes says that she used to say that there's nothing original, but ju- but I think that's all recombinations and everything gets recapitulated and re like sewn together in new ways in our own psyches and hearts. So the ingredients are all out there. It's sort of like with a physics metaphor, like matter can't be created or destroyed. So all the ideas are out there, the same chords, the same scales, but e another kind of philosophical idea, but each moment is new. So every expression can be new. And I think that happens like often I'll write a song that feels redundant. I'm like, I know I've heard this somewhere. I don't know where it's coming from. And then maybe like a year later, I'll see what the unconscious reference was, but it's still a new song. So I think that fresh perspective and bringing your own unique voice to things um, does make things original. It's kind of a paradox. It's like all the ingredients are all consistent, but the new perspective and bringing fresh energy is relevant.
And someone mentioned also that he agrees with your thing about Hendrix. Hendrix was quite real, and that he loves his interviews.
Yeah,
So
thank you. We all have a barometer for authenticity, I think. So, I mean, some people that we're used to seeing in interview, they're professionals at sounding down to earth. But yeah, I think I totally agree that I get that impression watching someone like Hendrix. It's like there was nothing fake happening, nothing contrived.
yeah, do you feel that the would you rather be a musician back in the time when there were you could buy like a 45 of a single? You think you'd made more money back in the 80s than you do now because you have Spotify? You can't really get MP3s anymore. You can download from iTunes. Well, what is there anything about the music industry that you could change if you could?
When I get nostalgic about previous eras in the music industry, and maybe I'm romanticizing them, but I saw this documentary maybe a year ago called Echoes in the Canyon, and it was about Laurel Canyon in LA and musicians being at each other's houses and cross-pollinating and playing each other's songs. And yeah, I get nostalgic about that sort of idea of being a musician, that you're in this community, you're all influencing each other. It's very it's a very vital exchange of creative ideas. So that still happens. It happens digitally now through DMs on Instagram and things like that. But I do think that there's an intense overemphasis on image. There's always an emphasis on image, but with the means we have now, I think you can really lose the clarity about why you do what you do. And like you mentioned Taylor Swift a few times, I often think about people like her who are, on one hand, very obviously creative, and on the other hand, so hugely hyped that I wonder about the interplay of those two things, like the challenge for that person to stay clear about what they care about when there's such a projection of godliness on them and such an emphasis on image.
Have you seen the Taylor Swift video Delicate?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of controversy with it. There's a lot of It's interesting when you watch it. You can realize how long it probably took them to do that one. That's my favorite video.
Mm.
So let's see. What's another question? I don't want to ask questions that you've already answered. What
I'm still
separates
thinking
you
about
from
your
other
weird.
artists? I'm sorry.
Okay. I was thinking, I'm still thinking in the back of my mind about your question about the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. I might
Yeah.
still need to get back to you on that one. But what
Okay.
separates me from other artists? Um, I think one thing is that I my resistance of being boxed into a particular genre, even though that happens at every step of the way. There's an agenda of doing that, and I get asked that what kind of music I play all the time. Um, but I think if you really know me or pay closer attention, you'll see that I'm always um, again exploring, trying to refresh my approach, see what's out there, see what's possible. So I think that's I'm very not interested in being formulaic and redundant. So I think that's a core value and feature of everything I do.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
This Soul for Poetry says, as a Canadian singer, do you hope that Canadians embrace you more, or would you prefer that you are embraced by the world more?
I think that the way I think about that is sort of being Canadian is like a natural springboard. It's like kind of like it's concentric circles. So I would naturally want to connect with people in a community that I'm I'm interacting with daily at first, and then it sort of expands out from there. But again, in the era we're living in, there's no limits to who you can access digitally. So I don't think I have a preference. I think I imagine you sort of build a foundation based on where you are. As I mentioned earlier, I'm about to release a French album, so that puts me kind of in the French sphere in a more significant way for the first time. So I'm curious about making those kinds of connections with French Canada.
Yeah. Do you know who Gordon Lightfoot is? Canadian
Yeah,
singer.
I
But
love him.
people as far as America and places Norway, they've heard of him. So basically, if you're Canadian, it doesn't necessarily mean just people in Canada know who you are. People far across the sea knows who Gordon Lightfoot is. But
Yeah,
I know there's a Matt Stern who's a celebrity who acts in Hollywood. Do you ever get mistaken for a different Matt Stern?
yes, I've been in touch with the other Matt Stern in South Africa. He's an actor, and
Oh,
he's has experience with he's also an Elvis impersonator. So sometimes we get each other's messages, or when we've
seriously?
uploaded music to Spotify or Apple Music, like
That's
our
interesting.
profiles get confused. So we've had to sort that out with them a few times. It's not the most uncommon name, right? So there's bound to be there's others that are involved in music in other ways, conductors and things like
Yeah, well,
that.
that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that answer, but that's a good answer. Yeah. I didn't realize you knew the guy because I was looking, somebody said, who are you interviewing today? I said, Matt Stern. They looked, which one? What do you mean? And there's like five of them or six of them. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, Matt Stern Music. That's the one you want to look at.
Yeah, I think my website is mattstern.com and his is mattstern, I think, .co.za, South Africa, something like that.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's an issue with having the same name,
Yeah, but
because,
it's amusing more than anything.
yeah, let's say I want to make sure I don't ask the same questions you answered already. Um, How often and for how long do you practice?
It's seasonal. I find when I have things coming up, like when I'm going into the studio to record, then I'll be practicing intensively, or for a bigger show or for a series of shows. Last time I did a bigger series of shows was over the summer, and I was playing constantly. Um, right now I'm more focused on releasing the new album, so it's more cerebral stuff. I haven't actually been playing that much. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that ebbs and flows.
Um, Not that the past is so perfect or idyllic, but artists seem to be more intimately plugged into each other's progress musically.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate these contributions. Um, That's my impression too. I think that again, we've all been kind of inculcated with this broadcast cast mentality lately. It's not to say we don't consume other people's output. We do, but we're so focused on one to many. Like, this is what I'm doing. Follow me. I think that that's my impression too. That people were plugged in, were really like intently listening to each other in a less rushed, disposable way back then. And I don't want to just romanticize the past, but I think that I do kind of long for that, the kind of unrushed, deep listening that is so productive for
Yeah,
making connections.
actually, is this one I should have given you first? It's they said they saw the Canyon doc as well, and they feel today that there's more duets and less cross pollination, to use your term. And then I was supposed to show this one. My apologies,
Oh, that's
but
okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
but you
yeah,
answered
that's
that.
the context. 'Cause yeah,
It's
duets are super common these days. I've done a number of them on TikTok, and it's really fun. Uh,
yeah,
so there's versions of that that still happen, but yeah, that term that Armando uses, plugged in. Uh, I like that term because it's like you're sort of there, staying there for longer.
yeah. So we soulful poetry asks, what new artists have you discovered that you find intriguing?
I find that tends to be musical peers. So when I play shows with other local musicians, or I have a number of musical friends from Montreal that are still releasing new music, and I find like I just heard from my friend Sarah Cochran, who sings mostly in French, and she actually played at that festival in France with me back in the day. She's releasing new music. Um, there's someone I came across here in Victoria called Sister Speak, who's releasing new music. So I like to keep tabs on what my peers are doing.
If you were to completely start over again from day one, what would you do differently?
I would have become a triple threat. And I'm only half joking. I think that I would have immersed myself in environments where I could be dancing, singing, acting, just expressing myself in really full, wholehearted ways. I think, well, like you mentioned a few times earlier, coming to realizing how much you're inclined to make music later, and I feel like I have no regrets. I'm really thrilled with where I'm at with in my journey, but with that prompt, that's my inclination, that I would have loved to be bathed in that stuff early on, so I it didn't take me as long to get comfortable and to give myself permission and to experiment.
If anybody, we're going to end this stream. We'll just ask you a few more questions. And please subscribe to this channel for more content. And we're going to have some wonderful, fantastic musicians coming up as well. Not that Matt isn't fantastic, but you know what I mean. I meant like, musicians. Otherwise, just subscribe to this channel and you'll get. um, so, yeah, I was going to ask, what was it? Yeah, so last moment to send in some questions. And a couple here is, who helped you most in your journey?
Uh, I think it's been anyone who's focused on getting me back to that place of that I mentioned earlier about what really matters to me, what my inner voice is saying about what next decision to make is. So I mean, my mom is a major factor in that. Just kind of like what really matters to you. Anyone can who can kind of bring you back to that place. Um, And, you know, in a complimentary way, my dad has sort of had me focus on things that I might try not to think about, things like how to make a musical path sustainable, things like that. So equally being challenged by people who have a different slice of life and perspective from you helps kind of hone you along the way. And and then and then these musical friendships have really sustained me too.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about. You said you had three older brothers. I think you said. Are they musical as well?
Yeah, none of them make music, but they all appreciate, again, vastly different genres of music. One of my brothers is a metalhead, and he goes to sleep listening to heavy metal. And another of my brothers has always really liked EDM, like electronic dance music. So I would grow up kind of hearing the bass boom next to my room, and that had an impact too, not only keeping me from sleeping, but also making me realize there's other possibilities for
Hmm.
ways I could be approaching music making.
And the final and the best question I kept for the very end. This is fun. Um, what makes a performance or song good, and how do you judge a performance song?
Well, again, I know I'm really exposing and reinforcing my value system, but again, it has to do with um, what feels authentic and intrinsic. So for me, a good performance is one where someone's really connected, um, not so focused on being impressive and showing off. That's its own thing, but what I'm interested in is feeling like you're having an experience that's making you feel something other than wow, this person's amazing. I think that there's a distance to that. Like, wow, I'm impressed, but I'm more interested in like I'm in it with you.
I determine the tune, the lyrics, and whether it's catchy. Like I don't want to be critical, but when a single is released, I listen to it. Said seriously, and I would either listen to the other songs in the album and say this one's better than that one. Why are you releasing? And I'm like, I don't. Why is it a hit? People are singing to it and dancing to it, and I'm like, la 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 la, the Vancouver lady, la la la. But okay. But I think those
But
are all the
that
questions you have. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to respond to that. I think catchiness goes a long way, as we all know. So sometimes the lyrics can be really, really exceedingly simple, but if it's something that will get stuck in your head and you'll sing along to all day, then that's the single you'll hear on the radio for sure.
Yeah. Well, Armando wants to say thanks, Matt, for taking the time. Enjoyed your responses. Make music, not war. Yes.
Yeah, agreed. As much as possible. Thanks, Armando.
And Soul for Poetry says, wonderful interview. Thank you for this. Enjoyed this immensely. So did I. Thank you, Soul
Thank you
for
so much, and
Poetry.
thank you for those questions too. Those were
Yeah.
some really, really fun prompts.
Yeah, we really actually enjoyed this interview immensely. I'm so glad that we were able to have you on our show today. And maybe eventually in a few months or maybe next year, whenever, we'll have you back and
We'll have a follow
ask
up.
you
Yeah.
how your life was the last whatever. And I really appreciate it. So everyone, you have one more question, and we're just going to close the stream. Let's say goodbye. Thank you, Matt. You've been a wonderful guest. Really appreciate your responses. Excellent music. I can't wait to hear more. Oh, and that album. Oh, yes. Before we go, that album that is coming out this year. You wanted to talk about that one.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can just mention that the first single of the French album is going to be released April 21st.
Hmm.
Online, it's going to be featured on CBC, and we're going to have an event here in Victoria at the Mint, and then the full album will be available a month later on May 26th, everywhere.
Excellent. So we're going to make sure that I get that and post in the description. OnStage actually has created a Matt Stern Spotify playlist for you. You can all share it if you like, and it's some of the songs that we enjoy. Matt, he's an excellent songwriter. I love his music. I'm so glad that we were able to get him on the stage. And once again, please subscribe to this channel for more content, more musicians coming up, and we look forward to that. So, Matt, we're going to end this, and let's say goodbye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, everyone.